Hey everyone, it's Dylan from the Black Forest Wood Company. We're back again, me and Charlie, for another week here in the shop. We've got something a little bit different this week. Right in front of me here, I've got 3 different kinds of epoxy. So starting on the left is the cheapest epoxy we could find, and then all the way to the right, the most expensive out of the 3 is our epoxy. And what we're gonna do is we're going to pour all 3 of these resins in the exact same way with the exact same piece of wood. We'll cut from the same slab at least. Same thickness. We're basically going to try and replicate the conditions for all 3, and we're going to see how they pour and how they come out. So to give you guys some pricing for reference on what we're working with here, I'm going to break the pricing down into a dollar per liter. That's usually how we price things out when we're trying to compare epoxies. So the Gorilla epoxy on the left there works out to $26.15 a liter. The pourable plastic worked out to $29.94 a liter. Usually the smaller containers, you'll end up paying more per liter. And you'll see that with our resin. So this is a 7.5 liter kit. It is $41 a liter that it works out to. So more expensive than the other 2 for sure. But we're gonna compare and see how they perform. One thing to add, I guess, with our resin, if you were to buy a 30 liter kit, your cost is about 33 bucks a liter, so you get it down a lot closer to these epoxies. But obviously you need a use for 30 liters, so it would require that. If not, you are gonna pay more. But let's jump right into this. We'll mix this up and we'll see how they work. Right, Charlie? All right, so for these pours here, for our test pieces with these epoxy brands, we're actually going to use our offcuts, and that is a question that we get all the time is, what do we do with our offcuts? So this is kind of like our offcut corner, I guess, and we end up recycling all of it and putting it in the store eventually, but we can also pick from here if we're making art pieces, coffee tables, anything kind of smaller. So picking from our offcuts, we need one that's long enough to get all 3 of our 18-inch pieces. So I think we need like 54 inches in total. That should be plenty long enough there. So we'll grab that guy out and we'll chop it into 3. All right, so what I'm doing here now, I'm just ripping these down a little narrower, just so that there's a little bit more room for epoxy in the mold. Since we are trying to test how the epoxy cures here, I'm gonna cut this down a little smaller than I usually would, so it might look like a lot of epoxy, but that's just for the test. So then we're going to do our same debarking process that we always do, which just starts with using a draw knife for the bigger pieces of bark and then a wire wheel afterwards to clean off the cambium. Reason we do this is because if you don't remove the bark or even the cambium, like you can really see it on here, this thin layer here, this is the cambium. That's what I'm talking about. If you don't remove that, the epoxy will bond to this layer and not to the wood, because this layer is actually really good at stopping epoxy from soaking through. So then you have the chance of your table being able to separate if you don't clean all that off. So that's why we do this. All right, so then in front of me here, I have got 3 of our reusable epoxy forms. These things have been a huge hit. We released them, I think like 2 or 3 weeks ago. We've already sold hundreds of them, literally hundreds. I think we have like 100 in pre-order that for the order that just showed up today. So Tim is going to be very busy shipping all those out. We also sell pre-cut pieces of wood that fit the different size of forms we have. So if you're making your own piece, they're really convenient for that. But today, we're actually just going to use them for our test. So here we go. We've got our 3 pieces. This one has a little bit less epoxy in it than the other 2. But for testing, for this test, more so what's going to make a difference is the thickness, and all 3 of these pieces are the same thickness. When you're pouring epoxy, what you need to be careful of is the surface area to volume ratio. So here we have obviously less surface area, but there's less volume. And then here with the increased volume, we're also getting increased surface area, so it kind of compensates for that increased volume, and it's not going to make it heat up any more on this pour than it would on that pour. What we're going to be testing today, we have 3 different brands of epoxy, and we basically tried to find the cheapest epoxy that we could. Some of it I don't even think ended up being all that cheap. It was still kind of expensive. I think this Gorilla epoxy was a little bit more expensive. This stuff was super cheap. It's called pourable plastic, 2-to-1 mixture. It says good for pours up to 2 inches thick. And this one was kind of weird because on the Amazon page, it said it was good for pours up to 2 inches thick when we looked at it. But on here, it's saying it's good for pours. It says max thickness 1 inch to 1.5 inches. So I don't know which one it is, if it's 1 inch or 1.5 inches. But we are going to be pouring it in here today. So it's a little thicker than what would be recommended, I think, for this product. But we do that with our product all the time, and we're actually going to be doing it here today because these are thicker than 2 inches thick. And we're pretty confident that our product will have no problem. But we will see how these other epoxies perform. So I'm kind of biased. I'm probably going to pick the one... Well, I was going to say I'd pick the nicest piece with our resin, but then I feel like you guys would say I'm picking the one with the least epoxy for our resin. So I'm going to pick the one with the most epoxy for, even though it doesn't make that much of a difference, for our resin. These are about the same. Let's go with this guy here. It's got a little bit more. That'll really put ours to the test. And then the other 2 will be for the other brands. Final step that we need to do before mixing our epoxy is actually clamp all these pieces down. I found with these reusable forms, you can actually get away with just 1 clamp on either end. There was also actually going to be a 3rd resin competing in this in these tests. It's Dr. Crafty's resins, I believe it is, and we ordered it off Amazon. It was supposed to ship directly from their warehouse, I believe. It never showed up. We got a hold of the company, let them know that we didn't get it. They acknowledged that. We then let them know that we wanted to use their product in a review online, and we never heard anything from them. We never got resin. We never got a refund. So can't really stand behind those guys. We would have loved to try it, but we never got the resin or a refund to let you guys know. All right, so first off here, we've got our pourable plastic that we're going to try. Just gonna open this up. So that is our resin, yep. And then this is our hardener. I think this might actually be the exact amount that we need. We're doing 6 liters of each product. So it's a pretty small pour. It's not really a dining table size pour or even a coffee table size pour, but it should give us an idea of how they react. Now, with any epoxy, before, like if you're doing it in a production setting and you're gonna make the switch to a certain brand, I would do all sorts of tests. I wouldn't just do a small test like this and then decide to buy like a 600-liter barrel kit. Do something small, then maybe buy a 30-liter kit, try and do a test, and then if you're gonna move into bigger quantities, do it after that. So let's start with our resin in here. We need 4 liters of this stuff. The viscosity seems okay. Seems relatively thin. Maybe a little thicker than our product, but not bad. The color's good. There's good clarity in this. Okay, so it's only 36 to 48 hours to cure, so that's really quick. I will be impressed with this product if it can pour thick with no issues that quickly. It wasn't quite a full 4 liters either, so we're just gonna dump the full contents of each. Hardener is definitely a lot thinner. So now we've got our PP, our pourable plastic. Now we've got our GP, our Gorilla Epoxy. What kind of a G is this? GP. And we'll do our 6 liters. So we've got our A to B, 2 to 1. This is the A. So 4 liters of this. Pretty similar viscosity to the other product. So I don't know if you guys can see that, but this does have a little bit different hue to it. We need a little bit more as well. So we've got our 2 mixtures set in the buckets, and now we're just gonna mix them up, see how they mix. And We do have a degassing chamber, but we're not going to degas any of these epoxies just because most people at home aren't going to have a degassing chamber, so we just kind of want to make it as realistic as we can. So first thing I'm noticing here kind of right away, I just put a mask on just because of the smell, is this stuff is definitely thicker. It's not mixing quite as easy as the PP, the pourable plastic. And it's got a little bit of like a bluish purple hue to it. I don't know if you guys can see that. Okay. So one thing I'm noticing here on the Gorilla Epoxy as well is it's got a cure time of 96 to 120 hours. So that's a lot more similar to our product. I would think that's a benefit for that product. It should stop it from overheating, but we'll see how it works. So first up is our pourable plastic. Let's see how this goes. Now we're doing our resin. It's Black Forest Deep. I hope it's going to be enough. All right, and then finally, this is the Gorilla Epoxy. So we got all three of those poured in. We will wait now, see how they cure up. I'm gonna come in here every little bit and check the temperature with the gun. Probably just record something on my phone if anything crazy happens. They're all at about the same level. We've got almost the same amount of epoxy in these, so we'll see how they turn out. So we are gonna use a fan on these. We are pushing the products, slightly past what their labels say, and most people will have a fan at home, and we would definitely, even for our resin, we'd recommend a fan at this thickness. So we will turn the fan on, all three of them. Should be pretty equal, and we'll see how they fare. So another thing I thought I should mention here, just so you guys realize, is I did not take that much care in making sure that there was no particles of dust in here. We're mostly just seeing how the epoxies react. So like in this one, the PP one, like there's little specks of dust in there. Those aren't imperfections in the epoxy. Same thing in ours. We got little black specks, lots of different chunks in there. And this one's hard to see because there's lots of bubbles in it, but there is small little imperfections. But that, I guess, actually might help us see which one's more clear, whichever one you can see the imperfections better, maybe. Okay, so it's the next day after our pours. Here with Charlie, we're gonna inspect, see how they look. So this is the pourable plastic. It's at 22, that's pretty good. Let's check for how cured it is. And it's still quite soft as well. Then we've got our resin here, sitting at 21, 22 degrees. Let's check it. It's still quite soft as well. And then we've got the Gorilla Epoxy. Lots of bubbles. I don't know if you guys can see that. After we demold these, we'll shine a light through them so you can really see. And let me check the temperature on this one for you guys. About 22. Still pretty soft. Okay, so one other thing I want to mention too, all of these resins are also getting the benefit of our aluminum cooled tables. So that's gonna make a big difference as well. But actually these all look not too bad right now. Not too bad, but we're still pretty early into the cure. All right, so it is Monday. We did these pours on Wednesday, so it's been 5 days now since we've done them, and everything is hard enough now at this point to take out of the mold. So nothing's really changed too much since the last time that I showed you guys, just besides the hardness. Pourable plastic has tons of bubbles, unfortunately. Didn't crack, didn't really overheat too bad. There's not shrinkage, but there is lots of bubbles. Then we've got our Black Forest resins. Really clear. We got a few bubbles just right down here. I think that's like our worst spot, but overall looks really good. Finally, the Gorilla Epoxy, not too bad, honestly. I was impressed by this one. I thought it was going to perform worse than it did because it's only rated to an inch and a half. There is still a few bubbles on the inside, but overall, not too bad. Another thing that you guys probably noticed watching this is that our resin is actually the most yellow, I guess, out of the three. This resin is pretty old. We've had it in our totes for about 8 months. But one thing we do know is our resin is formulated with a very high amount of UV inhibitors. So this will never get any more yellow than it is right now. And when it's demolded out here, it's going to look crystal clear like glass. We can't prove this, but we do kind of have an inkling that the other epoxies we used, like this one here, they have some kind of dye maybe already added in to kind of negate any chance of yellowing. Maybe they don't, but it almost kind of looks like these products are just ever so slightly tinted so that if any yellowing does happen, that negates it. Now, with that being said, we don't ever really recommend doing crystal clear pours because any epoxy product will yellow to some extent over a long period of time. Like when I said ours is not going to get any more yellow than this, I mean within the next 10 to 15 years, but beyond that, it's a plastic product. There's absolutely a chance it could yellow. Same goes for any of these epoxies. The difference is how long that's going to take depending on how many UV inhibitors are in there. So regardless, I would just put a couple drops of black dye, tint it ever so slightly, and then you're never even going to see that yellowing. So now, finally what we're going to do before we demold, we're going to use our durometer, and we're going to check the hardness on these. So this product had a cure time of 36 to 48 hours. Our product has a cure time of 5 to 7 days, so maybe not quite fully cured. And then the Gorilla Epoxy had a cure time of 4 to 5 days, so it should be good. So that's kind of interesting. We have 3 different cure times, but they're all at about the same hardness right now. Definitely none of them are what I would expect to be full hardness. Like for this being a 36 to 48 hour cure time, I would expect more than a 0.78 hardness. I would expect at least like a 0.8 from that. Ours, in about a week from now, will probably be at about 0.85. That's the maximum hardness it gets to. And then this one, I would expect it to get harder because you should have at least 0.8 for a tabletop epoxy. But we'll check in a few days and find out. Alright, so we've got some dust on the bottom, but we knew that was going to be in there. Pretty darn good. Here, let's... Very, very clear. Pretty impressed with this overall. Actually, really happy. Like, look in the edge.
There's no bubbles.
Yeah, that's...
You can see completely to the other corner.
Really?
Yep.
I can like see my fingerprints through the epoxy. That is kind of crazy, just how clear this one is. That's really impressive.
So that one was ours?
That's ours, yeah. Now we'll go for the PP. Wow. Okay, so now you guys can really kind of see those bubbles. Put my hand behind it. Can you see it?
Yeah.
Then we'll take an edge look. Yeah, so definitely a lot more bubbles in this one. I'm not sure, but this possibly could be avoided with degassing on some of these. But again, we didn't degas anything here, so this is naturally how our resins look. We still usually degas our resin. Honestly, we usually get more bubbles than this on when we do like a big table pour. I'm super impressed at how clear this one came out. But degassing on the big pours still can help. So then we'll move on to the Gorilla Epoxy. Not as bad.
Ooh.
You can see it more now.
Yeah.
Oh. Alright, let's do ours. There's like 5 or 6 bubbles, maybe. There's a few. I don't know why this is red. What?
That's so weird.
Okay, well that's something weird we learned. For some reason the Gorilla Epoxy turns red. So that was really, really strange there, what you guys just saw. We turned the lights off, shined a flashlight in, and the Gorilla Epoxy turns red when you shine a light in. So I would say that's kind of an indication that almost for sure there's some kind of dye in there or something. But I don't know why it would turn it red. That is a new one to me. Okay, so that was definitely kind of interesting to see how those cured up. In the beginning, we thought that we're like, oh my God, what have we got ourselves into? These other 2 resins are looking great. They're going to be just as good as ours, but it's in that long term in the cure where things really make a difference. So off the bat, they looked okay. But now when we look at the cured pieces, it's really, really easy to see the difference in quality in these resins. At least what I'm figuring happened here is that the less expensive resins generate a little bit more heat than our resin does, just a little bit, and therefore it results in some air bubbles coming out of the wood. You can especially see it on the pourable plastic. It's right on the end grain here of the wood where it's exposed wood grain. You can see all of those air bubbles actually kind of attached to the wood. So what happens is if your epoxy exceeds a certain temperature, if it gets too warm, it'll actually start drawing the moisture out of the wood, which is then released in the form of air bubbles. So that's why it's so important to keep your epoxy cold, which we were able to do with ours. Generated no air bubbles, crystal clear pour. Let's do a Charlie clarity test. Hey Charlie, Charlie, come here, come here, come here. Okay, he's not going for it. And then in the middle, like those are probably the 2 extremes. In the middle is the Gorilla Epoxy. But again, same thing, you guys can really see from the edge. A lot of air bubbles in there. Could probably get away with it if you're doing a metallic pour, but anything clear, you would definitely want to avoid that. So I hope you guys enjoyed this little comparison here. You know, I really want to make it clear, our goal here is not at all to slam these brands. I actually think there's probably still a time and a place for these epoxies if you're doing these super pigmented pours, if it's something for yourself and you're not so worried with perfection, maybe it's worth it to save a little bit of money. But if you're like us, you're perfectionists and you want everything to be as good as it possibly can be, it's pretty obvious that our resin is going to be the best for that. Again, no degassing there. That's just the way it cures. Careful mixing, careful pouring. And it all works out quite well. So I hope you guys enjoyed this comparison that we filmed here. Charlie's freaking out because Ben's at the door. But yeah, thank you guys. Let us know if you want to see more videos like this. Give us some feedback on this, and we'll catch you next week.